why do governments do, well, anything? I mean, why do they fight wildfires or run schools or police our streets? Why don't we just buy those things from a company? The same way we buy a car or a cup of coffee. We're going to get into all of it because the answer is actually hiding in this really simple but super powerful economic idea that explains why some things are left to the market and others, well, others need a whole different approach.
Just think about it for a second. We have fire departments that are paid for with our taxes, right? But you've never heard of a government pizza department. So what's the real difference between firefighting and, say, a pepperoni pizza? To figure that out, you have to see the world like an economist, and for them, not all goods and services are created equal.
So it turns out you can sort pretty much everything you can think of, from that slice of pizza to national defense, into one of 4 neat little boxes. And all it takes are 2 simple questions. Let's break them down. Okay, first question. Is the good excludable? This sounds complicated, but it's not. It just means, can you stop someone from using it if they don't pay up? A movie ticket is the perfect example. If you don't buy a ticket, you're not getting in to see the movie. It's totally excludable. Simple as that. The second question you have to ask is the good rival? This just means if I use it, is there less for you? That slice of pizza is definitely rival. Because once I eat it, it's gone. No one else is eating that same slice. We're rivals for it. All right, so here's where it all clicks together. When you combine those 2 ideas, excludable and rival, you get this amazing grid that sorts everything. A pizza is both excludable and rival. That makes it a private good. And the free market is fantastic at making and selling private goods. But what about the stuff down in that bottom right corner? The things that are non-excludable and non-rival, like national defense. Well, that's what economists call a public good. And that, my friends, is where all the problems start. But these categories aren't always as clear-cut as they seem. For literally centuries, economists pointed to the lighthouse as the classic example of a public good. I mean, it makes sense, right? You can't really stop a ship from seeing the light. But then, this brilliant economist, a Nobel laureate named Ronald Coase, dug into the history and found out that early lighthouses in England were actually private businesses. How'd they do it? Well, they made it excludable by charging ships a fee when they came into port. So a lighthouse is non-rival. One ship seeing the light doesn't stop another, but it turned out to be excludable. That actually puts it in the natural monopoly box, not public good at all.
And that brings us to the absolute heart of the matter. When a good is truly non-excludable, it creates this huge, massive problem for any private company trying to sell it. It's a problem so common it has its own name.
So let's circle back to firefighting. Let's say your neighbor's house is on fire. When the fire department shows up and puts it out, you get a huge benefit, right? Your own house is now safe from catching fire. You can't be excluded from that benefit. So why can't a private company, let's call it Firestorm Incorporated, just go door to door and sell protection plans?
Well, the reason is something called the free rider problem. Because you can't be excluded from the benefit, that feeling of safety when the fire next door is put out, you have this really powerful incentive to let everyone else pay for it while you just sit back and enjoy the perks for free. You get to be a free rider.
You might think to yourself, my little monthly payment isn't going to make or break the fire department. I'll just skip it. I'm sure my neighbors will cover it. But here's the kicker. Your neighbor is thinking the exact same thing about you. And if everyone thinks that way, the company makes no money, and then no fire department. The whole market just fails. Okay, so if the market completely drops the ball on these things, who's going to pick it up? Well, this is where government steps onto the stage. It seems like the obvious, perfect solution, right? But as you're about to see, it comes with its own special set of challenges.
You see, the government has one superpower that private companies just don't: the power to tax. It can make everybody chip in. So by collecting taxes from everyone, it can pay for the fire department, completely solve that free rider problem, and make sure this crucial public good actually gets provided.
But, and this is a really big but, that is not the end of the story. Just handing a problem over to the government doesn't magically guarantee a perfect result. In fact, economists have a term for this too. They warn us that we always have to worry about government failure, which is when the government solution ends up being inefficient in its own way. And this happens because, well, the people working in government are just people. They have their own goals and self-interests. A politician's number one goal? Get elected and then get reelected. For a bureaucrat running an agency, the goal is often to make their department's budget as big as possible, because a bigger budget usually means more influence, more status, more power. And those goals don't always line up with providing a service in the most efficient way possible. So this can lead to some real issues.
A bureaucrat might argue for way more firefighting equipment than is really necessary just to beef up their budget. At the same time, most of us voters are what economists call rationally ignorant. I mean, let's be honest. Are you going to spend your entire weekend becoming an expert on fire protection policy? Probably not. It's totally rational to not bother. But that combination of things opens the door for special interest groups to influence policy, which can lead to way too much spending and a lot of inefficiency.
So how does all of this theory actually play out in the real world? Well, it's absolutely essential for understanding some of the biggest, most passionate debates we have, especially when it comes to things like education and healthcare.
Now, things like education and healthcare aren't pure public goods. They're what economists call mixed goods. They're sort of private. I mean, you can definitely be excluded from a university if you don't pay tuition. But when people use them, they create these things called externalities. An externality is just a fancy word for a side effect, a benefit or a cost that spills over and affects people who aren't even part of the deal.
Think about it. When you get an education, you get a better job and make more money. That's your private benefit. But society gets a huge benefit too, an external one. We get a more informed voter, maybe the next great inventor. The problem is, when you're deciding whether to pay for college, you're only thinking about your wallet. Because of that, the free market, left on its own, will always produce too little education from society's point of view.
The same kind of logic applies to healthcare, but the situation, especially in the US, is way, way more complicated. And to really get a feel for the scale of this challenge, I just want you to look at this number: $8,000. That's roughly how much is spent on healthcare per person every single year in the US. That's more than double the average of other rich countries.
And all this crazy spending points to a huge paradox. We're seeing both market failure and government failure happening at the exact same time. On one side, you've got millions of people who are uninsured. That's a classic case of the market underproviding care. But on the other side, you've got these huge public programs that can create the exact incentives for inefficiency and overexpenditure that we just talked about.
So when a government decides to step in and deal with these messy, mixed goods, what can it actually do? Well, it's really got three main tools in its toolbox. One, it can just produce the service itself. Think public schools. Two, it can pay private companies to do it through subsidies, like giving grants to private universities. Or three, it can give vouchers, basically coupons, directly to people and let them choose where to spend them.
And that third idea, the voucher, is at the core of some really interesting proposed solutions for healthcare, like one from economist Lawrence Kotlikoff. The basic idea is give every single American a healthcare voucher. Then, private insurance companies would have to compete to win your business. The hope is to get the best of both worlds. You'd use the fierce competition of the market to drive down prices and improve quality, but you'd still be using the government's power to make sure everyone gets covered.
So there you have it, from fighting fires to getting flu shots. This simple framework, just asking if something is rival and excludable, helps explain the hidden economic logic behind why governments do what they do. Now, it's definitely not a perfect system. Government failure is always a real risk. But it's a direct answer to the very real problem of market failure, which really just leaves us with the biggest question of all. For any given service, where should we, as a society, decide to draw that line?